even though we're creating formal content for HubSpot Academy in the form of courses and certifications, ultimately my goal is to bring that human focus back to education. And I mean, making sure that the use cases that I'm incorporating are relevant.
Hey, I'm Corrina.
And I'm Taylor.
And this is Direct, a podcast we created to showcase the creativity and hard work of go-to-market teams everywhere.
We're here to share the stories and experiences of the hardworking, passionate individuals who make up go-to-market teams, the ones who truly make the magic happen.
Taylor and I have been fortunate enough to work side by side on some incredible projects together, and now we want to put a spotlight on the unsung heroes behind some of the best go-to-market campaigns out there.
In each episode, you'll hear from individual contributors who have gone above and beyond to make a difference. They'll share their challenges, victories, and the lessons they've learned along the way, all to help you unlock the next step in your career. Get ready to be inspired, learn something new, maybe even share a laugh or two.
Welcome to Direct.
Welcome back to another episode of Direct with Corrina and Taylor. I'm Taylor Young, and this is my ever fabulous co-host, Corrina Owens.
Hi, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here today. We have an extra special guest from a little company you may have heard of before. And she is going to share some knowledge bombs that are going to be so crucial to anything you're looking to do from a learning development perspective for your team. So thank you so much for being here, Brenna.
We're so excited to have Brenna Zenaty here with us. She is a Senior Solutions Partner Professor at HubSpot Academy, where she designs educational experiences to empower HubSpot partner organizations. Prior to joining HubSpot, Brenna worked in customer success and customer enablement for an ABM tech company with me. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia with her husband, Mitch, and their Boston Terrier, Rue. A few fun facts about Brenna. She doesn't have a formal education or background in learning and development, enablement, or instructional design. So we got there right on talent alone. She grew up in Rochester, New York. She almost went to veterinary school. She has 9 tattoos. I might have you beat. We'll have to decide. We'll look at time versus number, and we'll see. And she loves interior design, being outdoors, and is a Halloween and horror movies enthusiast. Before we get started, Brenna, what's your favorite horror movie?
Well, thank you, first of all, both of you for having me. I had a feeling that this question was going to come up. And this isn't quite a movie, but I just started rewatching Midnight Mass on Netflix, which is a Mike Flanagan series. He also did Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, a lot of Netflix specials, and that's right up my alley. Highly recommend for anyone that's into kind of gothic folk horror.
Didn't he also do one with children? Or was that a different one?
There were the one with the Haunting of Bly Manor. Oh, the Midnight Club. Yes, that's one. Also so good. His wife is Katie Siegel, who's in a lot of his movies and series, and I love her too.
You're a pro. Okay, I'm coming to you for any Halloween recommendations going forward. It's my favorite holiday of the year. Yes.
Likewise.
Very cool.
Now, that was a precursor to the very first question, but we'll ask you the very first question we always ask our guests, which is, if you had a magic wand, what would you use it for? Whether that is something that you might change about your role, something about learning and enablement, or something about your life.
Yes, I love this question. And I think, it might not be as applicable to maybe my current role, but I would say on behalf of all education and enablement professionals that I wish that go-to-market leaders inherently understood the value of education programs and wanted to invest in those programs. And maybe this is also kind of a call to action to L&D tech companies, but I wish it was easier for professionals in this space to prove the value of their efforts through data. So that's kind of a two-parter, but that is definitely something I would use that magic wand for.
That is a fantastic one, particularly the data piece of it, being able to prove value and prove ROI is at the top of mind of everyone right now. And it leads us straight into the project we want to highlight, which is the creation of one of the top 3 ABM certification programs out there, which of course was a collaborative effort, but primarily led by you. Can you give our listeners a little bit of background on that project?
Absolutely. So in 2022, I actually partnered with our customer marketing manager, Shay Castle at Terminus. So I think you both know and love as well. But we worked together to launch a 5-lesson certification course for Terminus's education platform, Terminus Academy. And that certification was called the Account-Based Strategy Certification Fundamentals was the focus. So this was Terminus's actually first public-facing certification course. It was also the first time that Terminus Academy content was made available to customers, partners, and prospects, or kind of the general public. Before then, we really used that platform and our learning management system exclusively for gated customer education, and also for internal enablement for go-to-market teams. So really exciting project, but a massive undertaking for Shay and I and all of our collaborators.
What would you say was the most difficult about getting this process to launch?
I would say maybe a 2-part answer here, if I can. I think certainly the most difficult part was the sheer volume of content creation required to launch a certification. Shay and I were writing the scripts. We were doing kind of the instructional design element of figuring out how this would be structured. We were writing exams and quizzes. We were coordinating with SMEs that were featured. We were designing slides, all of that stuff. And then a big learning curve for me was architecting all of this in a learning management system. So not only are you uploading all of that content, but I had to learn things like how to work with our developer team to get single sign-on enabled, which was not something we had in place. I also had to, I mentioned data before. That was a huge focus of mine at the beginning, but I had to work with people like our Salesforce administrator to figure out how to get that data out of the learning management system and into Salesforce to really create reporting that mattered to the business. So those were 2 huge things that I had never done before. And again, really took a ton of collaboration, a ton of research, and also a ton of experimentation.
That's incredible. And it sounds like such a big lift and a really big scope for a project of this size. Knowing that, I mean, at least to some degree, as you go into it, how did you and the team kind of come up with the idea that you should do a public-facing, non-gated academy course in this way? And how did you get buy-in for presenting it?
Yeah, so I'm sure both of you can relate to this, but as a company, when I was with Terminus, I think we recognized that, while the ABM industry was still and really still is this rapidly evolving part of the industry, a rapidly evolving strategy, it's becoming more widely accepted as a practice in B2B. We found at the time that a lot of the markets still consider themselves to be kind of in that early stage or the pilot stage of running their ABM program. And we also recognize, Taylor, you mentioned that it's one of the top 3 certifications out there in ABM. I think we also recognize that there was a gap in ABM education when it came to more formal learning, like a certification course. So for Terminus, I really thought of it, and this is kind of how I think Shay and I posed it, was that this was not only a thought leadership opportunity for us as leaders in the space, but it was also a potential lead gen opportunity, which prior to that, from an education perspective, had not been in motion. I mentioned that I really started in internal enablement. So lead generation was not something that I had been focused on previously through my efforts. And we also looked at it as a retention and adoption play for our customers. So not only do we want to educate the market and be thought of as this thought leader in this space, but we also want to provide the knowledge to our customers so that they know, how to use our software better, but also how to develop a good strategy to support what they're doing in the software. So that's really how we posed it and how we got buy-in for budget and resources. It wasn't that hard of a sell. Thankfully, at the time, leadership was very supportive across the go-to-market space. But yeah, it took a lot to kind of plan for that.
I can absolutely see that. And I think, NRR should be the main metric that any SaaS product selling company should be focused on. And ungating this is only going to lead to more awareness, education, understanding, interest. And it's also providing a lot of brand loyalty and trust when you do that. And so there's so much marketing techniques that you put into this. But my God, did you have to put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to actually like make it come alive? So I'm curious, have you almost developed like a playbook of sorts? I would love to go to what you're doing with HubSpot. Was that something where like that basically was your interview, was the playbook of how they can do this and how you can even make it even better?
Yeah, I think what was really cool about this process and doing the certification and then transitioning to this new role at HubSpot was I actually felt for like maybe the first time in my professional career, I felt super confident in the interview process, having gone through this intense process of creating this certification. I felt like I had a ton of great examples to draw on, but I also knew that I wanted to go into my next role with the opportunity to learn and grow. Like I mentioned, or Taylor, you mentioned from my bio, like I don't have a formal background in education or enablement or L&D. And the reason I call that out is because it's absolutely been a learning experience for me along the way. And I think I'm a forever learner. I love to teach, but I also love to learn. And that was really important to me in terms of the next role and the next organization that I looked at to kind of develop. So when I was interviewing, I felt super confident for the first time, like I mentioned. And going into this role, I knew I wasn't going to be a program manager. My role is, I'm probably more akin to an instructional designer. I work on a team of multiple professors across different lanes in HubSpot Academy. So I'm still really doing all of the content development and promotion. Thankfully, I don't have to manage any of our learning management systems. I also have a fantastic team of content editors, video editors, all stuff that I was doing and had to learn how to do on my own in my role at Terminus, which was a lot, but I'm definitely grateful to have learned those skills in that role. So I think going into the content that I'm creating in this role at HubSpot, one thing that I'm always thinking about that was super important in the development of that project was how to prioritize the learner experience. So what I'm really doing is digging into data to figure out what's working, what's not, what do people want more of or less of. I think in general, I'm always looking for opportunities to get more data and more insight to produce better content for our learners. And I think a second thing that I'm really embracing here in this role is that you don't have to be an expert on what you're educating on. You really should seek out those that are subject matter experts in whatever it is you're trying to teach and leverage them to help you build the best possible experience for your learners, which is so much of what enablement and L&D is about. But I think having that mindset helps relieve stress or barriers to getting started for me when I feel like I don't know enough about a particular subject.
Absolutely. And I have, even when I was first out of college and getting like HubSpot Academy courses, HubSpot has always been like the gold standard of academy and learning that I've seen as a digital marketer. And so I'm really curious from your perspective. You mentioned digging into that data and trying to make things improve and make retention of information better. Can you give our listeners a couple of top tips that you've come out of from, how you can improve retention in learning and enablement?
Yeah. So I think when you're thinking about designing learning experiences, like I kind of think about getting insights for two different purposes. When I'm looking at data or even qualitative feedback from surveys where learners are kind of giving like free text responses, from a content optimization standpoint, which is really helpful for me as the content creator, I'm thinking about or looking at information like how many certifications are being completed or lessons are being completed. Is there drop off in video content at a certain point? I'm also looking at things like exam pass rates to figure out if the rigor of the content is aligning with kind of what we had initially set out in the learning objectives. But I'm also thinking about, this was especially important in that project we were doing for Terminus, but also thinking about business metrics. Like in that case, I was also looking at leads generated from net new registrations, completions from active prospects of the content, signups and completions from existing customers. So I think having both of those kind of different data sets, those foundations, can really help you understand if the content you're creating is effective. Certainly, I think it's important to understand just like learning theory, like teaching adults, especially digitally, has its own frameworks. We certainly use frameworks like ADDIE from a content development process here at HubSpot, which has been really helpful for me. But I think, another thing that's been a priority for me is really just connecting with my learners. I create content for HubSpot solutions partners. So setting meetings with them, figuring out what projects they're working on, what they need help with, what are the skills that they're looking to develop on their team that maybe they don't have currently, and really like, how do they like to learn? And I'm very fortunate that at HubSpot, I have the ability to test new learning practices. I don't necessarily always have to do everything, status quo or business as usual based on how it's been done before. There's a lot of room for experimentation and creativity, which is awesome. But again, I think you have to understand your learners and what they're looking for and align that with kind of that overall business objective that we're trying to achieve.
I love that last line you said in particular, that it starts with what is best for the customer. And I'm a former educator, and I am very well versed on different learning styles. And that ranges from like, a young child to an adult. And I really appreciate you highlighting that, because I think that that's going to be the future for a lot of these platforms, is they need to understand their customers better. How are they best obtaining that information? And there's tools that can help with that, right? Like HubSpot may be able to do it itself. If you know that your audience is an audio learner, or if you know that they prefer to watch video content, or if you know that they need a live train session where they're like kinesthetically doing it with you, like even just giving them the option of saying, hey, which would you prefer? It's such a customer centric way to go about L&D. And I really appreciate you noticing that as the first element and then connecting it to the business element. Because if you do that, if you start with the right intention, that business outcome will certainly appear, and you will certainly get better at refining it over and over again.
Absolutely.
Well, what about the process with this playbook that you've done with Terminus has been different about the playbook that you've built with HubSpot? Obviously, it sounds like you didn't have to be 12 people at once. You have a lot of resources, but is there any aha moments that you had while you were creating this where you were like, that's what it is. That's what we need to do here. Like, anything about the process that really stood out to you differently now that you had done this for a second time versus starting from scratch and learning everything on your own?
Yeah, honestly, so many things. I think something that comes to mind that I kind of alluded to earlier was the idea that you don't always need to produce something perfect for it to be effective. I am very much a perfectionist, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to produce content, especially public content, that's going to have the value and the impact that I hope and be up to these standards of quality that I hold for myself. But I think that sometimes that can be a hindrance to really getting like speed to value and speed to market, but also speed to feedback. Like you don't really get that feedback you're looking for from learners if you don't get your content out there. And I think that's certainly a lesson that I learned during that project at Terminus, although we cranked that certification out in 6 months, which now that I'm working on a fully functioning academy team, feels incredible to me. But I'm really trying to carry that into this current certification project that I'm working for at HubSpot. I think a difference at HubSpot is I went from a 350 person company at Terminus at the time. I was an early employee. I knew just about everybody there. I knew who my SMEs were, how to get the information that I needed. And at HubSpot, we're an 8,000 person company. And a year in, I still feel like the pool of people that I know is very small. I'm still building relationships with learners, with our partners. And that's a challenge. And it can be a hindrance to getting content out there when you feel like you don't have enough information. And I think what I'm really doing in this process right now is just getting started. Is my mindset, just get started and then ask for the help that you need. So get an outline out there, connect with SMEs, get feedback. You don't have to have something perfect to move forward. So that's something I wish I had known when I was starting that project at Terminus, and definitely something that I'm trying to carry into the work that I'm doing at HubSpot.
There is a really strong theme that I think you keep coming back to here in relationships with your customer, knowing what they actually want, or your audience and knowing what they actually want to see, relationships with these internal subject matter experts, now relationships with your partners. Can you expand a little bit on how you approach building those relationships so people are confident, they want to work with you, they want to share? Maybe they're being vulnerable about their thought leadership, or maybe they don't, are a little worried about quality if they don't control the whole thing. How do you build relationships with the people that you collaborate with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I think about how I'm trying to build my network internally with folks at HubSpot, I think asking people who to connect with and kind of continuing that on in your conversation. So I'll connect with this SME, maybe it's a program leader or a team manager, and say, hey, I've got this project that I'm working on. Would you or someone on your team be a good person to talk to? I always try to do my research first, whether it's, taking a look at our internal wiki or content that's been produced to figure out who might be the best person to connect with. And then I always make a point after every conversation to say, who else should I talk to? Who else do you know that I should connect with on this project, which has been, again, invaluable for getting to know and build my network internally at HubSpot across our massive teams. And then from a partner perspective, I feel very fortunate that the HubSpot Solutions Partner Network is extremely enthusiastic. They're extremely generous with their time. They're super knowledgeable. They want to help, which makes my job so much easier. But I think, ultimately kind of just approaching it in a human-centered way, I have found is the best approach. I think, again, even though we're creating formal content for HubSpot Academy in the form of courses and certifications, ultimately my goal is to bring that human focus back to education. And what I mean by that is, making sure that the use cases that I'm incorporating are relevant to those partners, making sure that the assets that we're sharing or templates, or even, the way the content is outlined. You mentioned, Corrina, earlier, different audio or visual is really important. So again, I think just the advantage of having a partner network and a learner network that's very enthusiastic has worked well for me. So yeah, I think the same strategy that I use internally, who do you know, who else should I talk to, is something that I also do with our partners when I'm trying to build relationships. Our partners are very active on LinkedIn. So I think being active on the channels that they're active on has proved to be very helpful for me. So I'll make posts that are like, hey, I'm working on this new education project on this subject, would love to chat with anybody that has run recent projects or has a perspective on this or knows someone who might. And thankfully, I've gotten a ton of great response from that. And doing that also has yielded things like proactive outreach, like partners emailing me or messaging me and saying, hey, I heard that you're working on this thing. We actually just, led this big project or, launched a new service line related to this. If you need anybody in the future to speak as a subject matter expert or offer advice, I would love to connect. which, I understand maybe not everybody has that advantage necessarily in my position, but I absolutely capitalize on that, and really like incorporating the partner experience into learning is the most important thing to me. That's who other partners really want to learn from and hear from. So showcasing them and putting them at the forefront of my education is absolutely my first priority.
That is genius. And it is something that is not utilized in many companies that I have been a part of in the past or have advised or seen or been witness to, even as a customer, right? I think it's such an underutilized channel. And it just goes back again to that relationship building, like being so humble to ask for advice. That's just such a great tip. I mean, across the board, right? If you're starting at a new company, you have an idea of who you should talk to, asking that person, who else do you think I should talk to? I mean, that multi-threaded approach is just beautiful. And it speaks actually into your passion for multiple perspectives, multiple learning styles. And that's a very human element in you. And I would love to know your take on these software and tech companies in the learning and development space. Like that's their bread and butter. That's what they offer. And this is a little bit of a hot take, and I don't, want to put you in an uncomfortable position. But what would you advise to these companies about how they could improve, their core offering, which is not HubSpot's core offering? It's a part of making their product more successful. But is there any advice you would give to either those professionals or the companies in tech themselves about what they could do and focus on to elevate and make it, because I feel that myself as a customer of some of these platforms. Like, I feel like, where am I going? What is this? How do I understand this? This didn't resonate with me at all. Like, I don't feel the feedback loop that you've mentioned so much. So, hot take. What would you advise to either the professionals or just the community space of L&D in general?
This wouldn't be the direct podcast if we didn't get some hot takes. So I love their question so much. From a tech perspective, I have implemented 3 learning management systems. I've done a ton of shopping for learning tech, and I've also used a bunch of platforms. So I probably have a lot of hot takes when it comes to the tech of education. And I think one thing I have to stress again is that these platforms need to make it easier for L&D professionals to understand the impact of their education. Like, I think that is the biggest barrier to getting buy-in for programs like this, is the business doesn't understand how it affects the bottom line, which like ultimately we all have to prove in some way. We have to do that at HubSpot as well, even though HubSpot Academy has been around for 11 years and is well established. We still have to do that every day in the education we're creating. And unfortunately, I've found that a lot of LMS or learning tech platforms don't have either strong built-in reporting capabilities or they don't have strong integrations. It was really hard for me to integrate our last LMS platform for that certification with Salesforce to connect back to some of those business metrics I mentioned, things like product usage and even customer retention. It's really hard to draw a through line already to things like that when it comes to education. There isn't as clear of a line like there is for things like marketing activities, which can still be very hard to attribute back to revenue and retention. But a lot of learning tech platforms don't have that down. Like, it's, again, helpful for me as a creator to understand things like completion rates and video drop-off rates, but the CEO doesn't care about that. They want to know how this is impacting revenue and retention. And that's inherently just not something that's easy to do in L&D platforms. And I think another thing that I would say in terms of user experience is providing variety in terms of how the content is delivered. So a lot of the learning that we have at HubSpot is with video content, which is still super effective, but having the option to test out variety, like, a walkthrough demo or matching flashcards or things like that. Again, to really understand what works best for your learners, I think is the best way to kind of optimize the content for your specific audience. Also, in my experience, there is varying variety in terms of how different learning tech facilitates that. And not a lot of them have a lot of variety. It's usually just strictly video chapter content, maybe some audio if you're lucky. So those are two. I could go on and on about this, Corrina, but those are two things that come to mind that, I work out of a homegrown platform here at HubSpot. So we have the advantage of working with an academy, HubSpot Academy product team to give feedback to. But for the broader landscape, those are two things that I would say they could work on for sure.
I'm so appreciative of it. Your passion shines through like you wouldn't believe. HubSpot is incredibly lucky to have you because there is just such clear intentionality behind everything you're doing. And I am so grateful. I know Taylor is too, for you taking time out of your day to come on our show. And we appreciate you being direct because a big reason why me and Taylor wanted to start this show is we wanted to give people like the realness of what it's like to do some of these jobs and these campaigns and be open to speak our minds without fear of retribution or anything like that. So I hope you felt that this was a safe space to share all that. And I definitely know our listeners are going to gain a lot of value because you gave so many hot takes, so many tips. Thank you for that. But before I let you go, we had that magic wand question in the beginning. And we asked you, did you want to, what would you do? What did you change something about your job, your life, what have you? And you said if you had a magic wand, that you would use it to show the value of L&D and find a way to have data easier presented, easier obtained, etc., to prove out that value. After talking with us, has there been any aha moments that you thought, hey, maybe if I did this, I've got a couple ideas of my own. I'm happy to have you go first, but I'm also happy to give you my hot take too. But I would love to see if you had a moment of, hey, maybe I could do that to solve for that.
Yeah, well, it's something I'm going to continue to think about. And thank you both for the conversation. It's really great. This is a resource that I wish I had when I was just starting out, listening to conversations like this. So thank you both for facilitating. In terms of aha moments, I think ultimately just talking through this with y'all in a safe space, I think just helps reinforce my why and why I love to do this and reinforce the approach that I take, which is, again, that human-centered, that learner-first approach. I think hearing that resonates with both of you means a lot to me, and I think is ultimately the way that you prove to your business that these types of programs are valuable and have impact, because you both have been learners and you both understand the importance of programs like this and the change that they can affect internally and externally. So I think staying the course is important to me. And I think staying true to that data-centered approach personally is something that will continue to help me. So continue to be curious, not only digging into data, but having those conversations and getting that qualitative feedback directly from learners and translating that to that learning experience, designing what matters most to them is absolutely something I'm going to continue to push for in this role.
I love that response because it was very similar to what I was thinking, is that as you're having these conversations with your learners, they may have a fantastic soundbite for you, right? That you can then go back to your team. Can we implement this? Can we do this? And then bring them on for a 15-minute clip or testimonial. That could be audio, video, text, what have you. And again, you're just showing that social proof. We're not only doing the thing, we're getting the feedback and then we're implementing it. And so few companies are doing that. And then just continue to make them your champions, your customers, your champions by doing that. And they will continue to champion you in return. So I think that's a great way to think about it. And I'm really glad that we've, just by having the conversation, have empowered your worth and what you're bringing to the table, because any educator in any format has to always be learning and has to be open to that mindset always. And that clearly rings through with you. And I very much respect that opinion and that viewpoint, and keep with it.
I was going to add on that. And I think that something I was recognizing throughout the entire conversation with you is that you have so much expertise in this particular subject, but that you can share even beyond. So I know that what I would love to hear, HubSpot Academy, like I said, is one of my favorite examples of learning and enablement out there, but especially in tech. And so using that platform or what you know of how people retain information and just sharing more about how you guys prove the value of Academy and how you do that and sharing it with other enablement teams would be such a cool way to take the skill that you have for teaching and learning and get it out there even more. Like the learning and enablement, the LMS, these companies should be doing it, but I would like HubSpot's number one in Academy and their ability. So I want to know behind the scenes how HubSpot's doing it. And I'd love to see a professor come on and talk about that. That would be such a cool way to use your own unique skills and organization in order to change how go-to-market teams see enablement. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely something I'll bring back to my team. I think, our leaders on Academy do a lot of speaking engagements on this subject. Our leadership is extremely knowledgeable and have built this program from the ground up. So they are people that I love to learn from. But also thank you to you guys for giving me the platform to share my experience and what's important to me and why I love to do this work. Hopefully it inspires people too that are early on in the journey, or like me, who don't have a background in this but are interested in it and want to get into it. I'm always willing to talk to folks that want to bounce ideas off of each other or want to learn more from my experience. I hope that's something that I get to do more of. So thank you guys for giving me that opportunity.
It was our absolute pleasure. And you are welcome back on the show anytime. And we will continue to lift you up in what you're doing for others. And we will make sure that in the show notes, listeners can find how to reach you and connect with you, because all you're doing is just putting out good inspiration, inspiring hope into the world. It goes much more beyond your role, everything you said today. So thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Direct with Corrina and Taylor.
If you enjoyed what you heard in today's episode, please give us a follow, maybe even a 5-star review, wherever you listen to your podcast.
And if you know someone that you'd like to spotlight, if you want to share your own story, visit us at motionagency.io/direct. We'd love to hear from you.